Hello, my name is David Turner and this is another episode of Lunar Poetry Shorts, and today I'm at home in Camberwell in my kitchen. I'm joined by Kadeem Beresford-James. Hello Kadeem.
Hi.
And as always, by way of introduction, we're going to start with a poem.
Creatives. I am a poet. Hear me, for I am a poet. I am a person who says words, and I have a special word for me. I am a poet.
Thank you very much. That was short and sweet, but it leads really nicely into our first question, which is why poetry? But first, I completely forgot to say hello properly. Hello, Kadeem.
Hi, David. Thank you.
I'm such a professional. I wrote in big letters, but on another piece of paper that I should say hello to, and left that one upstairs. But anyway, hello. Why poetry?
Well, I started writing poetry in secondary school
after
one of my grandmas died, because of the way my family's set up, like half brothers and half sisters and whatnot. I had 3 grandmas growing up, and my brother's dad's mother, she died when I was still in secondary school, and it hit all of us really, really hard because we spent a lot of time with her over like summers and stuff like that. And I couldn't figure out a way to get the emotion out. I was really, really angry at everybody for no particular reason. And that's when I wrote my first poem. It was fucking terrible. I don't have it anymore. I don't even remember what it was called. But I remember it making me feel better. And then I started carrying around a little black book. And then everybody got to know me as the dude with the black book in his pocket, in his blazer pocket, stretching out the whole pocket. Yeah. That's
what part of the process was cathartic? Was it the writing? Was it sharing it with people?
It was the writing, because I didn't share it with anybody. No, I wrote it, and I would recite it to myself, and that made me feel better, because it was like understanding how I felt, because I didn't get why I was so upset with everybody, and then I wrote it down, and then I understood myself, and then
there's definitely something about locking in certain emotions, painful emotions, with words on paper, isn't there?
Yeah.
I mean, for reasons we won't go into just now because it goes too long, and I don't want it to be about me, but I started writing for a similar reason, in order to try and rein in the emotions in some way. Do you have any insight as to why you think that might work? I'm still struggling with the...
I think it's because when you think something, it doesn't really feel real until you say it.
Yeah.
With something like that, if you can't talk to somebody about it, I think writing it down is like you talking to another you. Yes. So actually you have talked to somebody about it. It just happens to be yourself.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's more of an internal monologue, which goes... and I think I found myself, I don't know if it was an internal monologue which happened just inside your own head, it would become torturous, but there's something about putting it on paper which allows you to just allow it to go. You can, it's there on paper, and you don't necessarily have to go back to it.
It's has like a life by itself.
Yeah.
Almost like like something in a test tube.
Yeah. And so maybe we could move on from that to your experiences now performing poetry. Is there a different type of what am I trying to say? Catharsis. That's a word, isn't it? Catharsis in there. Yeah, that is exactly what I'm trying to say. Sorry, my brain just froze up there.
That's cool.
Is it similarly cathartic to read in front of people, or is it a different type of
I find it different. The writing I find the same, but the performance is like I'm bearing my parts of myself to people. Like it's never the whole story, but it's always little pieces of the story, whatever the poem happens to be about. Like that one's about me finding myself. That one I read before. It's about me finding myself as a poet. It's like I now have a title, Kadeem Poet, and I feel like it only works when I perform it to people, because I know that I'm a poet. But other people don't know that I'm a poet until I tell them I'm a poet. So, it's a different kind of catharsis, but it's
I found it strange when I first, because it's still not even a year since I first read in public, and I know. I mean, it's close coming up to a year, but it's still under a year, and I found it very, very disheartening at the beginning about people's preconceptions of you when you go up, and there is, you do, ultimately I think probably everybody's got a poem similar to that, which is now I'm dealing with this idea that now you're a poet, and you can't go to an open mic and just read without stating that you're, it's like, you know, there is no real such thing as outsider art, there's no such thing as being an outsider poet, or it can exist, but it's such extreme circumstances. And that whole idea of getting up and standing in front of people and stating that, now I'm a poet and this is what I do and this is how I communicate with the world.
It's like I don't think it applies just to poets, because I call it creatives because it applies to all the arts.
And that's why I mentioned outsider art as well, because it's very difficult to be a painter and not show your work in some way, you know, because it's, I suppose everybody's work needs some sort of validation, and not to feel better about it and not to feel that it's okay, but ultimately most people seek validation of their work in front of an audience. How often do you read in public?
Not as often as I used to. I used to go to poetry nights every week when I was in uni. Yeah. That's when I started reading poetry aloud. Poetry Unplugged. Yeah. That's where I started.
So when did you go to uni?
Roehampton University.
Oh, okay, so you would read in London anyway, so it's not that far.
Yeah, no. Well, I didn't live on campus. I lived with my mum.
Sure.
Yeah, but so it was quite far because I lived in South Norwood. It's near Croydon.
Yeah.
So it's quite far to go, but I enjoyed doing it. So it didn't feel like a chore to go into London just to read at a night, because I really enjoyed it. I was discovering something about myself, because I only started reading then and then continued to read.
Sure. But
now that I'm out of uni and have to work, I don't go as often as I'd like. I've been to a few more in the past months, but I want to turn it into a regular thing again.
Yeah.
I want to turn it into it.
I feel like a lot of people that I know sort of took this winter off.
Yeah.
Now the sun's shining again. It's I think it's actually an important thing to talk about, is how difficult it can be to keep dragging yourself out to open mic nights, because the main thing is you're not always talking about things that are very pleasant in your life. It's not actually that nice of an experience sometimes getting up and talking about certain things, and then to do it in the dark when you're working, you get up in the dark, come home in the dark, go to sit in the basement and listen to a lot of stuff which you probably don't really want to listen to, get up and do your thing and then go home and get in really late. It's quite a commitment, isn't it, to keep going.
It is,
all the time. And did you find that it gets in the way of writing as well?
What, performing or winter?
Well, like if you're going to a lot of open mics and stuff.
Not in particular, because when I first started reading, I would write stuff on the way to open mic nights. Yeah. And I'd perform the stuff that I wrote on the way, and then that was it, basically. Like I would always want to read something new. I'd never want to repeat myself, because I don't know, I have this thing about repeating myself in general. It never got in the way, but it started to get harder because I started feeling like I had to write stuff that might get a decent response. Yeah. Because having a decent response is really gratifying when you're walking off stage, and then then like at the break or after the event, people come up to you and it's like, "Oh, I really enjoyed your poem," and it's like, "Thank you, I worked hard on that. Thank you for liking a part of me that I wrote and shared with everybody." And there were some nights where that didn't happen, and I went home and was kind of like, this suddenly isn't worth it anymore.
Yeah, because it goes back to the idea of wanting validation in some way. Yeah. And it's not actually, it is egotistical, but it's not I don't mean that in a negative sense. It's sort of a natural thing. We all want validation of the creative things that we do. But I don't know, you wouldn't be the first person that said that having that idea of validation in your head then stifles you a little bit creatively, and you need to at some point to step away from going to the same nights and meeting the same people. And I think that's probably if you had unlimited funds and were able to travel to any night you wanted to, that would probably make it easier. Because it's often moving in the same circles of people and poets that causes the problem. Not the nights themselves. It's just a repetition, isn't it? And I found, actually, because when I first started performing, that I had this idea that I wouldn't do the same thing twice. But then you're going to the same nights all the time, and you sort of are doing the same thing all the time. You're doing, you're being you in the same space, and it's essentially, it doesn't matter what words are coming out of your mouth. And that's a problem with performance, I think, rather than poetry, is the performance side.
Yeah.
But maybe we could have another poem at this point.
Yeah, of course. This one's called Contradictions. I'm wearing a hood, and my eyes are glittering. The world is reflective marble, glistening. I am moneyed and loved and have fun. I'm wearing a hood, and my eyes are glittering. These sound waves are low, even though I feel like I'm floating. I don't know why I've chosen sad songs today. I don't know why I'm wearing a hood, but my eyes are glittering. The man turns green without me waiting, and the cold winds stop when I start shaking. I've still got my hood, and the songs are still sad, and the world is glistening like my eyes are glittering. But somewhere in the glitter there are splotches of crimson, where children drag saw blades over bars made of silver, in cages made of twigs, on islands of biscuits. And the playlist ends. My eyes are still glittering.
Thank you very much. How do you critique your own work? Do you have people you share it with, or do you
No, I critique it constantly as I write it.
Yeah.
I tend to go for, on semi-long poems at least, like that one, I try to go for certain patterns, like either it's reusing the same phrase or rhyme or whatever, or meter even. It has to sound good to me, and if it doesn't, I have to go back and change it until I'm happy with like the first stanza, and then I can continue writing. As, it's like after every stanza I read through the whole poem as if I was performing it, and if it doesn't sound fluid enough, I have to go back and change it. I'm a perfectionist about that stuff that way.
So you would you say you're more focused on how the poem sounds out loud as a performance piece?
As a performance piece,
Yeah.
In terms of performance, I'm more concerned with how it sounds. Obviously, the topic of the poem is important to me, and I do consider what I write, what kind of metaphors I use, very carefully. I always think about them very carefully, even though some of my poems don't sound like I have. But I do consider it all very, very carefully, and I've got a lot of poems where I've tried to use a certain metaphor, and it's just not worked. So I've had to just stop writing it because it's just turned out sounding like a piece of crap. So yeah, it's.
And you would discard a poem based on one metaphor. Do you think you would prefer to move on to another piece?
Yes.
Rather than,
Yes, because it's like I've started building something, and a part of it near the top or even around the middle, as I've built up, has fucked up. Like a bit of it is fucked up, and the bit of it being fucked up has messed up the whole thing. So I would rather knock it all down and start again than try to change that bit. I do try to change that bit first, but I think like 2 hours trying to just change the same line, and I've had that experience. 2 hours of trying to change the same line, it's just not worth it. I'd rather just start again. Yeah,
it's quite a tricky thing to talk about as well. At what point do you give up on a poem? And it's obviously a completely personal thing, because I don't know, there often aren't very tangible reasons as to why you would cast something aside, because often this would just be a personal feeling or just the sound of something. Actually, it's just sprung to mind. Have you ever been on stage halfway through a poem and thought, this is fucking shit, and perhaps not stopped, but think, right, this is it, let's go? Because I've had that a few times.
On my computer, because I type all my poems and I keep them in this big purple folder, and on my computer I've got two folders in my poetry folder. I've got two folders. One that I call Before Enlightenment, and the other one's called Settled Storm. Before Enlightenment is all the shit, and Settled Storm is all the ones that I actually like, I think they're about balanced, which I think says a lot. Like I do write often, and I have written a lot, but not all of it gets performed, and I have performed some of them, and I fucking wish I hadn't.
Well, it's happened to me a couple of times where I've read something and it wasn't intended to be funny, and people laugh at it, for instance, and I'm like, oh, that's it. That's going. Oh, fuck that. Because it's obviously, I don't know. I don't trust myself to deliver it in a clear enough way to sort of communicate the true feeling of it. If people are, I think if an audience are laughing or not laughing, or are reacting in a way you don't want them to react. It's your fault. It's not their fault. It's the way you've delivered something or the way you've written something.
Well, I suppose that depends, because all writing, and especially poetry, is down to the interpretation of whoever's hearing it or reading it. So I suppose if you've got an entire crowd fucking pissing themselves laughing at something that's actually kind of meant to be somber, then maybe you've messed up a bit. But if you've got like one or two people sniggering here and there, like it's that's them hearing something that no one else has heard and that you clearly didn't hear.
Yeah, but I think I'd be happy with them laughing. Like the one or two people, just on another planet. They can laugh what they want, I don't mind that. Would you like to see your writing develop in any particular way?
I don't know.
No.
I'm a novelist as well, so I want that to develop. But in terms of poetry, I've never been really sure. Even when I was in school, like when I first started writing, I remember writing something at the start of a biology class, and someone leaned over my shoulder and sort of guarded my notebook, like, what the fuck are you looking at, mate? And he said, "You writing poetry again?" I said, "Yeah, what of it?" He said, "You know, you're never going to make money off that." And I, even then, as how old was I, like 15, I was like, so? This is what I want to do, leave me alone. It's like, now, I suppose, something I have considered is like putting them together into like a booklet, or maybe just a collection, and publishing that, and then having that to sell at poetry events.
You know what?
Oh my god, yeah.
I was talking to someone about this recently. There isn't enough collected writing by the same authors where they published short stories, novellas, and poetry all in one booklet. I don't understand why there's a division so much in one writer's writing, no matter what style it is, will usually sit together pretty well. I mean, you have to think a bit more about the editing, I suppose, and placement of individual pieces. But I've never understood why people say I'm a poet, and I write short stories. I mean, I understand why in conversation it comes out like that, but to other writers, why they don't just say, you know, you're just a writer, and I mean that in a really positive way. You know, if you should really be able to turn your hand to most things, and if you do, why can't they go in one pamphlet?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I agree.
I think it would make your poetry, I don't mean you specifically, I mean us, I think it would make our writing more accessible as well, if they were bookended by short stories. I think people that are not necessarily interested in poetry would be more inclined to buy a collection of short stories which also had poetry, and then they would have the time to read. And I don't think that's necessarily a way of dumbing down either. You know, I think it's quite a nice way to market people.
And it's a way of getting your name out there, not just as that dude who reads poems, but also as the guy who writes stories. I think I don't know. I'm asking a lot of people at the moment how they've self-published stuff that they self-published. None of them are poets; they're all novelists. And I've not got any replies from them yet because I asked them very recently. But the fact that I've not asked any poets, I think, is kind of telling. It's like I'm asking people who've published books, but nobody who's published a book of poetry. And it's like, that's because they haven't really self-published it, as far as I'm aware, at least.
I suppose it does happen. Possibly the reason the two don't go hand in hand, I think it's easier to self-publish your poetry, because if you've written a poem and you're happy with it, you don't necessarily need any outside editing.
That's true.
Whereas with a longer piece of prose, you probably would be wise, I think, to
get
someone in to edit and actually have a look at the thing before it goes out to print. So that might be a reason. Does your prose writing inform your poetry writing?
No,
not at all.
They're very, very different.
Yeah.
And I try to be as simple as I can in terms of poetry. I don't like to use really long, complex words, even though I know lots of long, complex words. I don't like to.
So you say.
Transcendent. Manifesto. But I try to keep the words I use simple, because I don't think that poetry should be about using lots of flowery words. I think we've evolved beyond that.
Yeah.
That's the English teacher version of how poetry should be, and I think that in 2015 we should be a step beyond that. There's a place for it, sure, if you want to sound that, if you want that kind of sound, but I think we've gone beyond that. So I think you should be able to get your point across using the simplest words you can. And I don't know, but my prose is like, I also try to use simplest words I can, but I did a writing course, and one of the things I tell you to do is, if you have one word that you can use in place of 5 words, use the one word.
Yes.
And that often means I'm using long, complex words. So, I don't know, and my poetry tends to be about me and my experiences of the world. The prose tends to be sometimes based on my experiences of the world, but usually the plots are completely fictitious.
I suppose also in terms of what kind of language you use and the sort of style of words you use. I suppose with prose, you've normally got more of a captive audience. They're a bit more invested in reading. They may have started 2 pages earlier, and just because they come across one long word, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to give up on on what they've already started out to read. Poetry, I think in most people's minds, is still quite throwaway. Yeah. And if you get 2 stanzas in and there's a word you don't understand, you can just put it down. Yeah. You know, it will turn people off very quickly. And I think I don't actually think that's necessarily anything to do with using a long word. That's just perhaps using words inappropriately and trying to be too clever just for the sake of it. You know,
like I remember I was at one night. I'm not going to say which night, but I was at a night, and the headliner, the poem he read was nothing but complex words. I felt like he'd like picked up a dictionary and had just found every word with more than 5 syllables and written them down in order. I know that wasn't what he did, because at times I could follow what he was saying, but for most of it I just tuned out because it was like 10 minutes long, and one poem 10 minutes long, and he just kept going and going. I was mystified. I didn't even.
It's an issue I have with poetry or spoken word, which is heavily influenced by hip hop or rap, in that most of it is based on language we hear in the streets, and that's the whole point of it. It's supposed to be very clear and very direct until they get to that paragraph or that stanza where they rhyme everything with initiate or something, you know, and it's just every sentence ends with the same rhyme, and you're like, what are you doing? This was so beautifully pure until this point that you picked up the rhyming dictionary or the thesaurus, and suddenly, or the both 2 combine, and you're like, fuck, what are you doing? This was
what words rhyme with silver?
This was going so well, you know, and it's hard sometimes because you can't sometimes get into this discussion without seeming like you hate that style of poetry, because that's not the case. It's just this, why overcomplicate things, and why, you know, and I mean I completely agree. I think the way I would tend to write poetry is definitely a similar style to you. I write in the way that you would hear people speaking on buses and stuff. I've got no interest. Actually, if I do write anything longer, I tend to get more it's much more cleverer. Well, you've got the space and the time to do it, haven't you? That's the thing, you know, and you can really show off all the long words, you know. And that
I know things.
Transcendent was pretty good, and Manifesto, very topical as well. We've got an election coming up. Maybe we could have a third and final poem. Of course.
This one's called Incomplete Masterpiece, and the thing I love about this one is I wrote it as I was walking away from the corner shop near my mum's house. It's a true story. The sight of raindrops on my skin made me cry the other day. They reminded me of when I believed in God, when non-believers were astray. Compliance was the only answer because my questions received none. A few toys in my imagination were my only sources of fun. The fickle designs of a child's brain care not for logic or black or white or rain or sun or snow or fog, no, only for demons that lurk in the night. Is it our instinct to instantly fear the things in the dark that we can't see? And why, just because the things in the light, can it not appear and yet still be? Still no facts. A pity, really, that thought itself is what made me cry. People will argue for one or another right until the day they die. Never a thought for the wasted time they could have used feeling sublime. Staring at raindrops on their skin, not waiting for a life after death to begin.
Cheers, man. Thank you.
Cool.
I nearly yelped in pain then. Did my elbow crack?
No, that was your elbow?
Yeah.
Jesus.
I'm becoming plagued by external noises on these. If it's not chickens or squirrels, it's been fucking elbows. Thank you. That was nice. I was listening. What have been your main influences of your development as a writer or performer?
Other poets on the circuit. I have never read a lot of poetry. I have maybe 3 poetry books, like one by Philip Larkin, one by Emily Bronte, and one by Edgar Allan Poe, and that's about it. And like I've read those, and after I read those, I was like, yeah, that was really cool, but I really don't feel like reading more poetry. I don't. Yeah. It's not something that I pick up to read because, and I suppose I know a little bit of disdain for history. They're gone. It's not that they don't matter, but I would rather hear the words from people who are still around, and my influences are mostly from other poets, because like there have been times where I've been in like a real slump in terms of my mood and my outlook on life, and then I've been at home and it's like 5 PM. I'm like, oh, I know, I'm just going to go out to this open mic night that I saw advertised on Facebook. So I go there and then I hear some people reading and I'm like, wow, I remember when I was in uni and I just started doing this and this was the feeling I had, and then I feel really, really uplifted, and it's always because of someone else's poem that I've read. And like sometimes there's someone who's just gotten on the circuit, sometimes there's someone that I've heard before on the circuit. So like it doesn't matter who they are. Sometimes I'll just hear something from someone and that'll be enough. That'll be enough to set my mind working. Like I don't know, I might look rude during some open mics, but I've just taken out my notebook and started writing something in the middle of someone's set because something they've said has set my mind off. And I can't help it, because if I don't write it then, I'm likely to forget it, because my memory is like that. So
it's something I really enjoy. It's writing notes or beginning a poem as somebody's reading, because you've been so inspired by, they may have mentioned something. You're not writing directly related to what they're saying, but it's set a train of thought, and there's something. It's really energizing to do that, to sit down and try and listen to them and try and get your thoughts down. It's quite a buzz, isn't it? What would you recommend to our listeners to go out and see or read or watch? And this doesn't have to be poetry related.
Good.
Literature.
In terms of reading, I would advise reading A Series of Unfortunate Events by Lemony Snicket, because there's lots of literature jokes in it, even though it's a children's series. There's a lot, like in one of the later books, there's the end of a poem by Philip Larkin, and the first line of that poem is "They fuck you up, your mum and dad." And considering that the book is for children, they can Google that one line and they'll find a poem with some swearing in it. So A Series of Unfortunate Events by Lemony Snicket, and anything else by Daniel Handler, mostly because he's my favourite author. And I don't know, his characters tend to make me want to write more. The things his characters go through make me want to write more, because I want to talk about my experiences, because some of his characters are like around my age, so I'm like, oh my god, I've had experiences, not this experience, but something similar, and I want to write about it, not prose. I want to write a poem about it, And in terms of seeing any Broadway show, Wicked, Avenue Q, anything by Cirque du Soleil, if you get the chance, go and see them, because they're all really, really good. These are things that I've seen and then I've gone home and wanted to do something. They make me want to do something creative, because I know that someone has created this thing that I've just seen that's really big, and that lots and lots of people, writer and non-writer, have gone to see and have really enjoyed. It makes me want to do that. So I'd advise those.
That's about it for the questions. Just take this opportunity to mention any blogs that you might be involved in.
I'm part of the Kerosene Chronicle blog. It's on WordPress, so it's kerosenechronicle.wordpress.com. We're moving to another website whose name I can't remember at the moment, but when we actually do the move, I think we're going to put like a post up on WordPress to say so. So follow us on WordPress, and you'll follow us.
What I'll do is I'll put the link to the WordPress in the video on YouTube, and then Kadeem can send me a message when it changes, and I'll change the description.
That'll do.
So hopefully, whatever's in the description is the latest link and the latest home for that blog. Cheers, Kadeem. I really enjoyed that. It was good chatting. Thank you very much. And you can see Kadeem probably at nights in London if you want to. You don't have to. Cheers.